So we have about an hour together. This is your time, not my time. So my goal is to make this helpful to you. In order to do that, let me understand a little bit about who's in the audience. So I guess let's start with size of company, smallest to biggest. So under 10 people, under 20 people, under 50 people. You can keep your hands up because I can't do math, which is ironic for being a data person. Under 100 people, and then anyone like in the 100 to 500 range? Anyone bigger than 500? Okay, all right, good. So we're all kind of medium sized. We're all probably starting to wrestle with data. Now let me understand a little bit more about the background. So data quants, data people, BI analysts. Okay, this may be too rudimentary for you. Engineers. Oh, nice. I'll say controversial things. Product people, marketers, salespeople, customer service. All right, so I got the quants. All right, this is cool. Good. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about me and my role, because I think it's important context for what I'm going to talk about. It was about 4 months ago, super authentic. So like I asked that you, at least if you're going to repeat this story, you don't attach my name or the company's name to it. About 4 months ago, we had a big kerfuffle. And long story short, the data was wrong. Inevitably, the financial forecast, the finance numbers didn't align with the marketing numbers. We were reporting two different sets of ROI. I'm getting a head nod from the data people, like, oh, FML. I also should give you the headline, I'm not great with language, so if cussing offends you, I'm sorry in advance. So we had two different sets of numbers. It was a huge controversy, a lot of this. And in order to get it under control, we made an organizational change. Up until this point, I'd been running product for 3 years. And in product, I saw the role of product to be heavily involved in the data, understanding not just why things were happening and what changes were happening, but actually measuring our performance and measuring our success. So I was probably up to here in data and one of the biggest complainers. So lesson number one, careful what you complain about because you may have to fix it. So that's what happened. The CEO said, we're going to create an analytics team. And I said to him, that's interesting, but I don't want to be your reporting bitch. I actually want to have a seat at the table. I think data is an important part of driving what happens in the business. And I think our biggest challenge as a company is people aren't asking the right questions. And so he said, all right, what do you need? How are we going to organize it? So I annexed data warehousing out of engineering, which has some challenges that I'm happy to talk about. We annexed the BI team, the data analyst team. We can talk a little bit about BI versus data analysts, which I will, into the new team. So they had been in finance. I then put in a product manager. I hired actually an outside product manager to actually create a roadmap for the data team and figuring out what types of data we wanted to organize. I then carved out a reporting analyst function, someone to actually build out the reporting. And so what I'm going to talk to you about is a little bit of our evolution, how we're structured, what's working, what's not working. And I'm going to be super authentic about all of our problems, which we still have. So again, I don't use the, that's why it's surreal to be teaching people when it feels like my day is all messed up. But I'll share my stories in hopes that you can at least avoid it or maybe get ahead of yourself or say, oh yeah, we've got that problem too. Maybe we can talk through it. So I prefer interaction. I prefer conversation. I feel very far from you right now. That makes me sad. So as you have questions, just put your hand up and let's talk. So again, my goal is to give real actionable advice. I'm going to cover kind of the three core areas that I think about for data or the data team, give a little bit of like who does what. I think one of the biggest challenges that I struggle with, we've struggled with, I've seen others struggle with, is kind of like who do you need on this team and what are the roles that we need within the organization. And then talk about what data looks like at different levels. I think I also have been blessed to work a lot with our board members who do some great seagull management where they like fly in, they shit all over your stuff, they steal your french fries, they fly out and you're left with like, ah! And like one of my classics is like, shoom, we need to do machine learning, shoom. And you're like, what are you talking about? So we'll talk about what data looks like at different levels and why you probably don't mean machine learning if you only have 7 users. Here we go. So I whizzed through this a little bit, and I'll go into details on some of the core areas, but this is how I think about data. There are many ways to think about this problem. I won't espouse that this is the perfect answer, but this seems to be what is working for us at HotelTonight right now. Infrastructure. So this is your warehouse. We'll talk about that in a little bit. I do believe there's a different role between reporting. So people who are, we'll talk about what that is, and kind of reporting out on what's happening in the business versus ad hoc analysis. I also think that machine learning and data analysis are kind of both tools and jobs and responsibilities, so we can talk a little bit about that. They ultimately, in our business, lead to two different parts. One is an insights team, or excuse me, an insights outcome. So like, this type of user does this, and if we could get more of this. So I think you've heard a lot of these things are like growth teams. So the legendary one is like what, Facebook, like if you have 7 friends in 10 days or something, you're stuck there for life. There are all these rumors about those things, but those are insights versus a recommendations engine. So how do we productize this data back into our solution? Those are two different users, but also very real users. Okay, let's start at the bottom of the chart, data infrastructure. So this is how your data is structured and organized. This is kind of what data you keep. That is a big question. You don't have to keep all your data. You probably don't have time to get events into everything, so you're probably not keeping all your data, which is fine, and may actually end up being okay. It may end up being better in the long run because you don't end up with a ton of noise that you have to course correct. But it's also about how you structure it. So thinking at this point, even from the very beginning, really hard about how you can structure your data and how you're going to organize it. And by that, I mean what you actually make into discrete buckets of content or objects. So to make it even simpler, if you've used Excel, if you can put something into a cell, that is kind of a structured data, right? So 2 plus 2 equals 4. Those are 3 different columns. Like, think of your data that way rather than like one long string of data. And so the goal really for this group of people in this team is to be able to answer the questions asked today and in the future. And I think what's really hard and very different from how most products are built is that most products are like, let's build to see if it works, and we can always throw it away and change our minds and start over. In fact, we're encouraged to kind of prototype and move quickly and have something that, a year from now we'll probably throw away. And that's just not reality with data. It takes a little more foresight to think about how your infrastructure is organized. So that's one part of the equation. Here's what we struggle with really candidly at HotelTonight, even 5 years into this into our company. So how do you balance accuracy and timeliness? So if you want data that's reported accurately, sometimes it takes a while for all of those events to come in and collect. If you want data that is timely, we don't have time to wait for that. Think about these trade-offs as you're figuring out what your infrastructure needs to be. How real time do we have to have data and dashboards? Are you really going to do something differently if you know what happened in the past 15 minutes within your product or marketplace? I would challenge you on why, but we hear this all the time within HotelTonight. Like, it must be real time, or I must know now. I need to know what our room night sales are up to the past 5 minutes. There's nothing you're going to do differently with that if I tell you what it was an hour ago. But these are consequences and costs and implications on how you're architecting your data. And then finally, something else we struggle with is how do you move fast and iterate quickly but instrument well for the future? So for anyone who's working on the front end, however you're designing your events and what triggers your planning, that all feeds back into your data warehouse. Hopefully it's structured, because we already determined 30 seconds ago that was going to happen. And so when the data events come back, how do you make sure that you're releasing things so that you can know what's going to happen, but what is that minimum viable amount of data? There is no answer for this. This is up to you and what your company needs and what you need at your stage. But I put it out there as these are kind of like 3 problems as to why data gets all fucked up, because this is what's happening. You're moving fast and you're not thinking through what events you need. However, having been in the world, and I'll be candid, like at Prezi, where we instrumented everything. I mean, we had data coming out of our ears. Everything was instrumented. It took us forever to release anything because we were breaking events, and all we knew was noise. So there is a happy medium somewhere in the middle. I don't know what that is for you, but I challenge you to have that conversation internally and think about like how much precision do we need versus how do we balance moving fast. That was infrastructure. So reporting and BI. I do think this is separate from data analysis. This is probably at a small size, it's someone's part-time job. At a larger size, it's probably an individual's job. At scale, I've heard of companies that have like teams of people who are building dashboards and using third-party tools to make this happen. But ultimately, the responsibility of these teams or this role is to figure out what you watch regularly. So what are your metrics, your KPIs? It's probably what you're reporting out to True. It's probably what you're reporting out to your board members. This is not new news to anybody. But it's basically like what you need to get everybody on the same page and how you run the business. I think where we've struggled, which I can get into on the next page, is how do we measure different areas of the business in a way that it aggregates up into the key company drivers. That sounds really easy, but it's not. So it's thinking about how you can feather all of those metrics together in a way that you're actually measuring what's important to the business, but also how the different areas, functions, businesses, however you divide your business, are actually working. What is really the most important? So I think where this function can really struggle is in an organization where there isn't clarity on what the most important thing is. So I have someone who full-time builds dashboards, and she can make many dashboards. She can make them say anything, actually. And that's the beauty of data, is you can really make it say anything you want to. But where she struggles is there isn't alignment or clarity within the business on what the most important things are to watch. That's not a data problem. That's a leadership problem. And frankly, it's probably who most of you are in the room are. So like own up to that and realize that you probably don't have a reporting problem. You have a lack of clarity on what the most important metrics are in your business. And you got to get that shit organized before you can push it down to having a dashboard. So think of that. That's something, and I'll be honest with you, that's something we still struggle with today. My afternoon after this is setting KPIs for the second half of the year. And like, I'm already tired just thinking about it. Like the finger pointing and the back and forth and like, this is the metric, that's not the metric. But those aren't reporting problems. The other data challenge is thinking about what's a leading indicator versus a lag indicator. So many of you have probably heard of this, but I challenge you, and I challenge myself, like I don't know that I have a great answer to this for our business. What is the indicator that actually does have to be real time and does matter and make you change behavior versus the lagging indicator that's kind of what already happened and what have we already done. Having a dashboard that separates the two, kudos to you if you can get one, but having one that separates the two and knowing when to use which is important. And so, again, these are things that the BI role or function, however that person or those people are operating, need to tease out and work with you to tease out. So think about who's doing that in your organization. And if you don't know who it is, it's probably many people. And I will just give you like fair warning, that's probably going to be a recipe for disaster because you now have many different teams creating their own metrics, operating their own silos that don't go back up to what that top level KPI is. Question, yes, thank you. Okay. Yeah, so the question was, how do you actually drive that conversation to figure out what is the most important and what those indicators are and should be? And so there are many techniques for negotiation. The way that I tend to handle it is desensitize yourself from the situation. So start with like, what do we need to tell our investors? What would the outside people actually care about and think is meaningful? I also think you should figure out what like your one golden metric is. And I hope for most of you it's revenue. Otherwise we've got different problems and I can't help you in this session. But think about revenue. What are the key drivers of the revenue? And so what are the, for HotelTonight, that becomes room nights and that becomes ADR, what we call our daily rate. And then what are the drivers of those things? Then it's not about what's the functional metric and why does product care about conversion and marketing's yelling that the traffic sucks or the traffic's good, but product's saying it sucks and that's what's hurting conversion. If those are not key level metrics that we need to be aligned on, those are not necessarily important parts of the business. So desensitize, and the other strategy, so either think about how you're going to report it to outsiders. The other flip we do in that around at HotelTonight is we model other businesses. So how do other businesses do it? It's much easier to complain about someone else's data than like to have that internal fight on your own. And so if you say like, for us we'll say like, how does Expedia do it? And then how is that different from say what an Uber or a Lyft does? And that is important to our business because you know what Expedia is a one and done transaction and Uber and Lyft are playing under lifetime value and acquisition costs. And modeling other businesses will help you think through what you need to watch. Yeah. Yeah, so the question was how do you kind of get data to integrate within the organization and communicate widely? And this actually is where I think my product management skills actually are probably the most helpful. So I'm an over-communicator and an over-sharer. I do a weekly update company-wide around what research we've done, what we're working on, what's going on. I have assigned each of my analysts to an area of the business. So one of them works on demand, users, one of them works on supply, hotels, one of them works on kind of finance and key business operating metrics. And we do something we call Spy Council. So every week, so they go to the respective team meetings, and then we get together as a team, and they report out to each other what's happening in the rest of the company. Then as part of Spy Council, they take that back out to those organizations and report what they're working on. I honestly think that the transparency comes from role modeling. And so to the extent that you can share what you're working on and what's important to you and help other people guide your roadmap and decisions, the better you'll be at getting influence on their roadmap and decisions. Yeah.
How do you manage like domain expertise in the different like Spy Council things versus understanding what data they actually need?
Tell me more about that.
So in the sense that you have your Spy Council going out and part of like the finance thing, but then come back and report to the data team. Having the background in finance to understand exactly what numbers they're working with, the data they need, and understanding the data side, and then how do you enable the finance people to talk properly to your data person?
So this is that is an amazing segue. Thank you. For what I think the role of the data analyst needs to be. And I think the biggest challenge that I've seen with people I've interviewed and worked with, and we haven't done a great job at this at HotelTonight for a while, is getting people who are doing the analysis who understand the business. I think you have to be able to do both. I don't expect the person who intersects with finance to be able to like tell me what the gap measure is and like figure out how to reconcile things for the close. And I certainly don't expect the finance people to understand like data structure and table. In fact, that's terrible. Like they're not good at that. But I do expect my analyst to be able to liaise between the two groups. She's the super expert in data and how it's structured and how we can do analysis. And then that only matters to the extent that it intersects with what the business is working on. And so through the Spy Council conversations, I mean, she comes back with questions around, okay, so we're not like live streaming this because like I'm gonna be really authentic. So we have things like we changed revenue definitions. We've changed revenue definitions 4 times since I got to HotelTonight. That's insane, but it's true. Sometimes it's like when the night someone stayed, sometimes it's the night someone booked, sometimes it's inclusive of taxes, it's exclusive of taxes, all these different things that actually in the data side really matter. And you only understand the importance of those and are able to bridge that by having this constant conversation with finance and just asking questions. I think where we've really failed, and one of the reasons this team was created, is because we had analysts who literally sat in the corner of the office, like, what do they say, like the key to org structure is where everybody sits in the office. Like it was like so symptomatic that they were in the corner of the office, like in this bunker hole, and never intersected with the rest of the business. They had no idea what was going on. So maybe I should have just like called this communication 101. I don't know, but it's true. It's really hard, and it's also hard because you're working with, in my experience, a group of analysts who are incredibly like thoughtful and reflective and precise, right? That's what's rewarded, is creating very complete models that are incredibly accurate, throwing them into a business situation where you're probably not, well, one, our data isn't good enough to be accurate, it's just not enough volume. 2, we don't have time to wait for precision, right? We've got to move fast. And then 3, they don't even understand necessarily how that data is going to be used and how that's going to flow through the rest of the system. So it's tough to kind of find that person who's really interested in in going out and discovering all that new area at the expense of spending time precising the models. I don't know, however you say that, like making them better. It's a struggle, and it takes a lot of coaching and recruiting, frankly. All right, I love it. I love questions. Questions are better than me talking. I get really bored with myself. So, plug for questions. So then we have this analytics team, our data science team. So the goal of this area is to really be able to answer questions. So people always ask me, like, what do you look for in data analysts? What's the difference between data analysts and data scientists? What's the difference between a data analyst and a data scientist? How do they use machine learning? My belief is this is all a lot of jargon, but the way I describe it is a data analyst is someone who's analyzing data. There is also the skill of data analysis, which I'm sure many of you possess. That doesn't mean you're a data analyst, but a lot of people can do analysis on data. You probably didn't get out of school without doing that. But a data analyst is someone who does a lot of analysis on data, and a data scientist is someone who does that but applies what I'll call scientific, or excuse me, more engineering technical applications of that. So, you know, if you're using R, if you're using Python, if you're finding ways of doing predictive, you're maybe using some machine learning tools, figure out how to model the data and come up with the right way to, say, forecast how many bookings we're going to do in a day or how many rooms a hotel is going to sell. That, to me, is data science. It's a blurry line. I also think data science is a skill, right? We have engineers in our team who do that, right? They're building tools that help the hotels forecast how many rooms they're going to sell. We have those people in our finance team because every day they're being asked to put out a forecast for the next 3 weeks about what's going to happen in the business. So I would, if the whole thing sounds confusing and mystifying, I would just remove all of the vocabulary and talk about what you need and what you want to have done. And ultimately, that's really just around getting answers to questions. Having those people being able to balance the business needs with the technical skills and communicating a complex idea well. It's not easy. So those are the key areas. Where we struggle with data analysis at HotelTonight is what's a really good insight versus what's a fun fact. I spend, so having come from product, I'm immune to people telling you what to do because, you know, all day long people will be like, oh, the feature should do this, and oh, we need this feature, and, you know, whether it's, you know, inundated, it's easier to listen to the users, it's annoying to listen to people internally who don't use the product, going on about that. But the answer is, the same thing happens in data, where every day, all day long, people are asking questions. And I think the key skill to develop with this team is, what are you going to do differently with that answer? If I actually told you how many hotel rooms that hotel was going to sell, what are you going to do differently? Are you going to call that hotel and have them load in more inventory? Oh, well, that actually is helpful for the business. Like, well, what is the get from the ask? I think that's an important thing to think about. And the other ones is questions are never just questions, right? So this was one of my favorite exchanges that happened just before I did this presentation. So like, what causes a user to convert? Okay, well, it's the selection of hotels, it's the prices, it's actually the day of week. We sell a lot more on Fridays and Saturdays than we do during weekdays. It's the weather, no joke. We're overperforming this week. We overperformed 3 or 4 weeks ago. California's having exceptionally good weather. We're a heavy California product. That's a large part of our revenue. Like, these are just weird things that go on. So anyway, okay, so let's predict. Well, no one can predict the weather, so let's start with that problem. How do we predict all of these different areas? And then, okay, so are we going to do something different with that? Like, are we going to drive different inventory to different users? Well, yeah, I guess we could. We could personalize it, but then what causes a user to convert? Anyway, the point is, like, all of these simple questions on their surface become these long conversations, and I would ask of you to have the empathy to say, like, are we asking the right question? Is this an important question? And are we going to do something differently based on what we learned? So this is the challenge of the data analysts. All right. I've done some of this already, but I will keep jamming. Are there questions in the meantime? All right. Structure your data. This is a true story. This, maybe you know who I'm making fun of. This is not structured data. You can't filter for which room has wireless for free. This is disorganized mess. Please don't let that happen. Strings of characters are a disaster. This is a common problem I see everywhere. They're legacy businesses. Maybe you guys are smarter than that. If you're not, get out ahead of it now. Just structure your data. Build for portability. This is not a vendor plug because I actually don't even know if I like them or not. One of the things we decided to do 2 years ago is implement a tool called Segment.io, which basically sits in our app and then it bridges to all of our app tools. And so the way I think about this is it's the pipe through which everyone accesses, it's the middleware, that all the systems access our data. It's been incredibly helpful for us because it's allowed us to trade out vendors as need be, rather than being completely sucked in and dependent on a data tool. As we have evolved, our budgets have grown. But on the other hand, like our need for what a tool can do and how we use data and what we do versus what we're counting on a tool to do has totally evolved. So just think ahead right now and plan for data portability. It's not something you have to even take action on, just something to be conscious of that over time, you're gonna wanna try different tools. You know, we were Looker customer number 2. We still use Looker. Looker is no longer a great tool for most of our senior leadership team who no longer thinks or understands how the data is structured. So just always be thinking about data portability. These are kind of like foundational things to think about. The other side note is storage is cheap. So whenever I talk to the CFO about data and he's like, oh, this is so expensive. I'm like, yes, well, stop telling your team to write so many friggin' queries. But anyway, side note, he will say, God, it's storage that's really expensive. No, storage is cheap. Storage is very, very cheap. If you're choosing about whether or not to collect data because of storage, just take it. It's cheap, take it, bring it all in. There are other things that cost much more money, and so to the extent that the only trade-off on whether or not you're collecting data or tracking a bunch of events is cost of storage, just do it. All right. Reporting and BI, what not to do. So align on your terms and KPIs. So we talked a lot about this. I won't repeat myself, but you know what you measure is what you watch. Our CFO has a favorite trick where he will try to force KPIs into the process just because he thinks it's an important thing for us to learn about. It's a dangerous game because then you learn all sorts of things and you have people running around with chickens with their heads cut off, like tracking a metric that they don't even understand. On the other hand, it absolutely accomplishes his goal where we now know a lot more about random metrics, but whether knowing more about random metrics is constructive or not, you can probably figure out. But aligning on your terms and KPIs. And with the tools, you know, less is more. I think I've seen a lot of really amazing, robust, beautiful data visualization tools. That is fine. If you have a lot of data that's right to look at, I would invest long in storage and be super short on like super fancy tools. I think there's free stuff out there that's pretty good. I think there's some basic visualization stuff that's pretty good. You don't need Tableau and some of these like super mega tools. And again, so I'll share that, not that we're doing anything right, but we at HotelTonight we use Looker, and we haven't even implemented any of their visualizations. We still like get grids of like dates and numbers. And it's getting the data is more important than necessarily the visualization. You can always export to Excel, and even Sheets has done a really nice job with their charting to just kind of get the basics going. I would also say for your reporting and BI teams, yeah, Martina. That's a good question. So the question was, do I encourage my data analysts, data scientists to learn about data visualization? I encourage them to learn about storytelling and communicating complex ideas. I think data visualization is part of that. I have yet to find a really great way to teach them about that. Edward Tufte, I don't know if there's any design nerds in the room, does a big session on data visualization. It's shit. Sorry, I think he's great. It's just not a great event. So I haven't really found the right answer for like what does that, but I mean, you know, a picture tells 1,000 words. Like that's why Instagram's famous. So figuring out how to communicate complex ideas is probably a really hard skill. It's like super skill. Oh, training people on storytelling. I don't know. If I had that, I would like be a teacher. And that's why it's surreal that I'm teaching. I think training people on storytelling, I think role modeling is important. I think figuring out how to distill things into crisp deliverables is part of that. And I think we read a lot of other people's blogs. So like Airbnb has an excellent data blog. We read that. I think seeing how other people describe their data and their insights and their analysis is really important. Of course, now I'm like at a loss for other blogs that we read. Snowflake has a good one. There's a lot of these up and coming data aggregators who are always trying to sell third-party data, like TXN Solutions or something like that. We met with them last week and they have a blog. Anyway, check out the data blogs. It's good for storytelling. So I do think that for data analysts, one place to look is product managers in terms of like where to find these people, in terms of being good at storytelling and distilling complex ideas. It's important for data analysts to know who their users are, like who's actually going to consume this report and how are they going to use it. Be clear about what problem that needs to be solved. You know, MVP, like do we really need to do some sort of massive data robot machine learning experiment to figure out like, I don't know, what to put at the top of the page? Probably not. So like figuring out how, like what the minimum viable amount of analysis is. Having a metric for success. So I do make my, this is really nerdy. I do make my reporting analysts report on the number of times each dashboard is used within the company each week. I think that's a good leading indicator for how well we're solving a problem and where people are no longer paying attention. So think about like some sort of readership metric. And then plan on maintenance of data. Plan on maintenance of either reports or maintenance, and certainly of the warehouse, and think about how you're going to invest in that. Data science, everyone's doing it. We need a data scientist. So I love this graph. I don't know that I 110% agree with it. I shouldn't say that I'm a data person. I don't know that I 100% agree with it. But I think it does really describe kind of the situation we're in and what's going on, and it's fully plagiarized from Google Images, and I didn't attribute it, and I'm sorry. But I think it's a good way of showing where we are in terms of like what data science is and how data analysts are similar and how engineers are similar. Everybody tells you they need a data scientist. So true, authentic story. 2.5 years ago, we hired this PhD data scientist he is one of the smartest people in the Bay Area without question. We would try to throw really hard problems at him. He loved to build predictive models. And the long story short is, one, we didn't have enough data to really give him anything that was like fully bulletproof and actionable. And we were just too early in that kind of project. And two, he was building these precise algorithms at a time where we just needed something that was like 20% better. So I would ask for those, and at that time, we were probably 120 people. I know people isn't always the best proxy for size of business and complexity of business, but I share that for those of you who are in the room thinking like, I need a data scientist and we're 30 people. Maybe if you're Instagram, like that's a really, figuring out those algorithms are really important. For us, it was something we invested in that was probably not a great relationship for either side and didn't end well. So I would also say don't corner the market on data science. I gave this little spiel earlier, but seriously, there are a lot of people who fit into this little white quadrant. There are definitely strong engineers who've been very passionate about math and statistics who can do great data science, and you just throw the business problems at them and they'll figure it out. Like there are data analysts who are incredibly robust in terms of their skill set and lean a little more towards engineering who can figure things out. Data science, just be careful. Anointing someone as the data scientist can sometimes be the worst job in the company because you're asked to do a lot of different things that don't necessarily align with each other. I tend to believe that functional experts who skew towards one of these ways can do data science, and that way they always fall back on their old job, old skills, when there's not enough hard data science work to be done. We need to do machine learning at the next board meeting. What are you doing about AI? Have you integrated with Siri? Only because we have our board meeting tomorrow, do I know that? So I guess machine learning is a tool, It's a tool that can be used to solve a problem. The question is, do you have hard enough problems, and are these the right problems, and is machine learning the right solution for that? I can't answer that. There are smart people on your team who can answer that, but I think my advice to you is when you do hear that pressure of like, okay, we've got to implement machine learning, I think the next two questions for you to ask are like, what problem are we trying to solve, and is machine learning the right solution to that problem? Personalization, another big topic thread. Again, I would just throw the flag around having enough data. We have, I don't know, PR told me, I think we have like 25 million downloads or something. I don't remember what the number is that PR is quoting now. But we have a lot of users. Personalization is really hard for us. The average user only books a hotel room 4 times a year. The average user only books a hotel room on HotelTonight because they have a last-minute need twice a year. Like, personalizing, even with 25 million users, is really hard for us because we have infrequent events. Now, you may have a product where you have 1,000 users who use it every single day, so personalization is super easy. Just think about whether or not it's even feasible and whether it's the right problem for you to be solving. I also will give a small shout out to, I hate personas, and I hate personas because they tend to assume that people fit into these finite categories and never move. Now, Martina's a marketing expert. She'll tell you, that's not how personas are done well. Fine, we can debate about that later. But I hate personas because it kind of tags you user as like, I'm a business traveler. Well, the challenge with data is sometimes those segments change. Like, I'm a business traveler during the week, and I'm a weekend getawayer on the weekend when I'm traveling with my husband. I'm the same person, so be careful with how you're starting to bucket users and what the implications are of the decisions to really personalize and segment a user a certain way, because they can move. And so again, back to this maintenance question, if you're going to go down this path, how are you going to maintain and evolve your personalization as user behavior changes and as your product changes? A few words about hype. I think I've kind of previewed a lot of this. So sometimes you're taking a fighter jet to go get the groceries. It's like over-engineered and overcomplicated. Data science can be that way. I believe data science is a collection of skills, not necessarily a job. I believe machine learning is a technique, and even you can learn these tools. So I mentioned kind of quickly Data Robot. It's a free, I think you can do free trial for 14 days or something. We've done that like 10 times. Just change your email address. And, oh God, I hope they're not in the room. Anyway, it's a very cool tool. And you can just upload data and just see start to play with models, start to understand some of the jargon. Don't be intimidated. I mean, I guess if there's one thing I could tell you, like if this sounds really scary, just spend an hour reading blogs and like go jump on Data Robot for 20 minutes and you'll like totally impress your team because you'll be fluent in data, at least enough to know that you don't know too much, but you understand the concepts. And I think that's an important part of it. And frankly, many problems can be solved the old-fashioned way. This goes back to this personalization problem at HotelTonight. I'm afraid to add up how much money and time we've spent on personalization and continue to spend on it, even though we have this data problem I talked about before, when in reality, if we had taken that time and just said, okay, this is what we think the best algorithm is, and this is what we can learn from a multivariate regression around what actually drives user behavior, and let's do this, this, and this for the hotel score, and be done with it, we probably would have been a much smarter organization. So here's how this is affecting my life at HotelTonight. Maybe you can share some of this pain. We already talked about having a full-time data scientist maybe not being our best strategy. The other thing that we haven't done a great job of is like data changes. Data doesn't really change. But how you define the data and how you are managing those definitions and what the rules are of that data do change. So as you're thinking about all of these different like hypey things, make sure you're foundationally thinking about locking down your data in terms of structure, rules, and consistent definitions. The other thing we struggle with is kind of black box personalized algorithms, but I've talked about that. So, all right, what questions are there out there? Yes. So the question is, like, with small, disparate user sets, how do you actually know it's meaningful, and then how do we know when we have enough data? So statistical significance is kind I don't know, is math, like it's real. So you can look in like how many events or how much time it takes to know if something is statistically significant. I don't remember what the website is, but if you just Google like statistical significance, you can like punch in the numbers and it'll tell you whether that's a good idea or not. And so what I would say when the data sets are really small, sometimes you just go with what you know you believe, and it goes back to laddering up to like what's the key metric, right? So if there are a group of users who are heavily engaged with the tool, use it every day, you know, the time on site or however that's described in VR, or what you're really trying to do, you're trying to create an engaging product and that's how you're going to monetize, find those users and just chase them and see what they do and study those users. If you're looking, maybe it's the question, the need is for more broad adoption, right? You're a shopping site in VR, and so you just want people to buy once a year. Well, then find those users and chase that data set. Those are just great examples of when like all of this is like total hype, and you just need to be like, these are the users we're going for, these are the users who behave this way, and our goal over the next year is to get more users who do this, and figure that out. Yeah. So how do you structure your data when you're building a new feature or a new product, and how do you kind of get out ahead of that? So tactically, two things we do as part of the SPY Council. One, we have the data analysts sit in on kind of like the feature discussion at the beginning and think about like what data we already have and how does this align with current data, so that you're kind of like in it from the beginning. And then the second tactic is ideally, because I'm a realist and I've been in product, ideally, the product is being built to move a company metric or some sort of KPI. That will tell you what you need to know. So should the feature be designed to improve conversion, what data do we need to know if that's happening? What data would we ask next around like, is it who's converting, who's not converting? Is it like what they did before they converted that matters? So going back to like the objective of the feature or the business initiative, and how do we break down all of those pieces of data in that tree to understand what's important, is how I think about making sure you've got all of that thought out from the beginning. And then the reality is you're going to ship with incomplete tracking. And so that's just life. At the end of the day, like tie goes to the user over tracking. It's fine. Data people get that, or they should. Some of them may not. That's fine. Just be mindful of those trade-offs and build in the time to actually implement and improve the tracking over time. I guess that's an important takeaway, is that data is a product. And so we need maintenance. We need support. We need 10% of your roadmap, please, to improve the events, maintain the warehouses, maintain the different pieces of information so that it keeps working. Yeah.
Do you have any stories of where the insights from the data analyst team have helped? Any wins?
Oh, yeah. You're making me sound like a negative person. Give me a minute. Yeah, insights where data has helped. I mean, I guess data has helped a lot. So let's see, what are some of my favorites? So we've used insights from data to understand how our out-of-home marketing campaign went. So we did this out-of-home marketing campaign for 6 weeks in San Francisco. We used the data to understand which areas were performing more and actually see what patterns there were in user travel. So that was pretty cool. We saw that by advertising in San Francisco, we actually could lift bookings in LA and New York. Another example of data as a success that actually led to a product feature. This is why I think it's very cool. So we recognized in our data that a lot of our Las Vegas bookings, our last minute Las Vegas bookings, came from LA, SoCal, OC. So that was an interesting insight. When we took it to the hotels in Vegas, they weren't necessarily surprised. Like, yeah, we get a lot of people from there. But what we'd love is to be able to get more people from there when when we have just a weekend that's really open. But how could we actually just get those users and not discount to all the users? Well, that got our product team thinking about like, well, maybe there's a way to segment the users based on where they're located and price differently. And so then we developed this feature where the hotels in Vegas could target with special pricing people in SoCal versus leaving prices high or normal for New York City. Then data came back through, and we saw that by lowering this discount or offering this discount, we were able to improve conversion, I think like 14 or 15% by driving better pricing. And so this is like the symbiotic relationship between data, users, product, data, that really kind of brings it all together. Those were good days. Thanks. That made me feel great. Yeah?
So you talked a couple of times about, how you need to kind of tax on engineering to keep the data and warehouse up to date, and how sometimes the insights become product features. But does data actually develop some product features? Because oftentimes the replication engine is going to be developed by data scientists, not by pure engineers.
You had me until the end. So does data ever develop products, and why wouldn't that happen?
Oh, no, I'm not saying it necessarily wouldn't happen, but you've talked other times about how you have like a quest for showing the product. But don't you kind of develop some of these things yourself, or?
Yeah, so I mean, we develop a lot of tests. I mean, I think one of the things I've tried to coach in my language is like us versus them, and that's why I do think it's helpful that half of our team came out of engineering, half my team came out of finance, and I came out of product, so we already have these great relationships established. But yeah, so we're working on finding a way to acquire more people who use HotelTonight for business. We have an idea on how we can actually do a reward system, and so we're pushing that back to product to be like, hey, can you run this A/B test and figure out like which of these rewards is actually going to change the user's behavior over the lifetime, and how can we cohort it? Yeah, so we do become a voice back to product. I understand they have many voices that need things. Yeah.
You talked a little about you don't need to keep all the data. How do you make that call? I'm curious.
So there are a couple of reasons not to keep all the data. Candidly, one is because you have compliance and lawyers breathing down your neck and discoverability. That aside, because that's a legal thing, and so I'm not equipped to handle that conversation. I think sometimes if you have data that doesn't have clear rules and clear definitions and moves and changes all the time, you're going to be in trouble when you go back to look at it later. So we've had situations where we either tag an event differently in the app and then it changes, or back to this revenue conversation. I had someone in the sales team come to me and be like, "Oh my God, the business is down 60% in New Orleans this year." And I was like, "Hold up, that doesn't sound right." And it was because she was using an old variable that no longer is important. It was no longer accurate, basically. And so that's the reason to get rid of old data, is if it just is no longer helpful or accurate or reliable because your business has evolved or your product has evolved or you're just doing that event differently. Get rid of it, because I'm living in the hell of no one's been really culling the product or the data product for the past 6 years, and so I end up in this New Orleans conversation, which takes a lot of time. It's also how the whole story started, with finance and marketing going like this. So, yeah. All right, we're closing to a wrap, so think of all the hard questions so that I can say we're out of time and I don't have to answer them. For Zelda fans, I kind of went through my different levels of Zelda. So here are my takeaways. What you can do tomorrow when you go home. So if you're level 1, data level 1, 10 people, my message to you is structure your data with anticipation. Here's your challenge. With anticipation that third parties will someday need to consume it. If you can get it that organized, you'll be great. Just plan ahead. It's a good discipline to think about that as a bar of, are data structured? Well, is your data structured in a way that if a third party wanted to consume your inventory for HotelTonight as an example, or do a partnership on your users, would that be possible? And then the second is define and report on your success metrics at regular intervals. I hope all of you are doing that. But just to be sure, report on your success metrics at regular intervals. And success at this point is just knowing what matters and watching it. If you advance to level 2, you can hire an analyst who can dedicate some time to doing some of this like data science, data analysis. This person can also be shared as like a BI resource in terms of building dashboards and answering questions. And you can implement a light reporting tool to figure out how to get the same information to everybody. Again, these are like cheap, free tools. maybe pay a little bit for it, but like light visualization tools that actually just get people seeing the right data and seeing it consistently. And so success at this point is just knowing your business and knowing how you can improve your product market fit, understanding what metrics really matter. Level 3, if you have enough data, you can test multiple variables and models reliably. So I would start with that benchmark. Do you have enough data to do that? If so you can contract with a data scientist. My advice would be contract, don't hire. We learned that lesson. Experienced researchers can be brought in for really complex problems. You can bring in people to do things like user segmentation. You can bring in people to do some really hardcore quant stuff. Hiring those people is both expensive as well as can be frustrating on both sides because it may not be what you need full time. And then empower your engineers to test out some machine learning and other solutions. They probably are, by the way, already doing it. They're just not telling you about it. So you might as well embrace it and have it happen in a way that is collaborative, and empower your whole company to play with machine learning, think about data science. Again, I know I'm a broken record, but I do think it's important to think about this as a skill, not a job. And so all of you too can be data scientists. So success here is understanding what you can test to really accelerate the business. And then level 4 is really around the hardcore personalization, product recommendations. You can implement machine learning and prediction in many different facets of the business. Don't just think about how it impacts your product. Think about how you can more accurately forecast your revenue. That's probably a great use of data science that doesn't maybe hit some sort of ROI metric and isn't user-facing, but will save you a lot of time in terms of having to worry about that part of your business. Determining indicators of employee performance. We're also playing with, can we be predictive about whether or not you're going to call customer service, and if you are, like, what do we think you're calling about in order to save a couple of minutes of customer service time? So these are all very interesting applications that may or may not be relevant to you, but start with the foundation and get there. I think where we've made the mistake is we kind of went really hard in level 4 and forgot about level 1 and level 2, and now we're trying to regroup. So that's my story. What else can I answer for you? How can I make this time valuable for you? I think we have 5 minutes left, 4 minutes left, 3 minutes left, 5 minutes left. Anything I can answer? Questions, feedback?
So when we go back to level 1 and level 2, what sort of, how do you tackle it? What are the things you're focusing on first to be able to handle that, given that you're already sort of playing in level 4?
So it's been going back to basics. So making sure our data is structured, we understand what we have, how it's defined, and what it is. 2, making sure we know we have standardized dashboards about how it's reported, and everybody's looking at the same pieces of information. I think those are the 2 big keys of just getting the foundation right that we got astray on and left us in the situation where the teams weren't aligned on what the metrics were. Yeah.
Yeah, I also have a level 1 question. At HotelTonight, what are the dashboards that the product team looks at every day?
So the product team looks weekly, not daily, actually. We don't even have a daily product. On a weekly basis, the high-level things we care about are conversion, the usage of key areas. So we have key features that we want to make sure the funnels work. So we're monitoring those. Over time, as we launch new initiatives or new products, that will change a little bit. And so, for instance, I was mentioning we're doing this test around how we can get more business bookings or people who travel for work to use HotelTonight. And so we'll watch those users and that user count grow. The other thing we do is then break that conversion metric down into different drivers, right? So part of it's traffic, but also part of it's source. How does paid versus organic perform differently? And how does new versus repeat perform differently? But at the end of the day, it's conversion and the funnels on the key metrics, or the key features. Yeah. Yeah?
How do you divide using data to identify some kind of technical failure versus experiential optimism?
I mean, if I could do that, I'd be rich. So how do we figure out, how do you use data to define technical failure versus experiential failure? I'm going to go out on a limb and say I don't know that data will answer that for you. Data is the what, not the why. And so I would challenge you to bring in 5 users or go to 5 users in their environment and watch it happen and see if it's a technical failure or if the users just don't get it.
I noticed that like engineers want to track different things to identify when something's broken, versus like what a product manager might want to have users using it. And then there's all that noise from the technical collection.
Yeah, and I think those are both important questions, right? Like, is it broken? It's kind of important. Because if it's not working, there's no, like, does the user like it feedback. And I think it's okay to have different sets of metrics around, like, is it broken versus are people adopting it, using it? I think the noise then becomes around, is it most important that it be 100% perfect technically, or is it more important to be usable? I mean, there is obviously a baseline, like, in my world, like, if the app doesn't load, like, it doesn't matter how good the experience is. But figuring out that trade-off between perfection and users is like, that's why you guys get paid the big bucks, right? Like, that's why you love your jobs. It's amazing. Yeah.
If you have a like conclusion or epiphany or realization or something, and you want to keep that around for posterity and make sure that whether it's you or your coworkers can look back on that and see that, do you have a way to keep that organized?
No, I do think so. For anybody who's looking for a new company idea, I do feel like there's a light knowledge management need. I don't know what that tool is. What we do today, what I do today is, so I mentioned this weekly update I send to the whole company. So in that is the report from what each team, the analysis each team has released. For the good ones, we link for all of them, we link to the report. I send that weekly, and I keep that doc in a bigger Google Doc. So that's like a really shitty way of doing it. For someone who knows a better product, call me maybe. I would love to use something better. But all right, we're at time, so you guys have to go hang out in the beautiful sunshine. But thank you for humoring me.